Good morning. Good morning. Get this started in just a second here. Yo, yo, yo. GCM says, hey, perpetuates, FTP. You know what? Let's start it on that note. Arr. Good morning. I see a lot of my favorite people in the chat this morning, and I'm glad to see you. I hope. And I'm going to try to talk for a minute or two before I get to the good meat, because I want to make sure you all have a cup of coffee in front of you. Because we're gonna do a little bit of a tribute this morning. We're gonna be talking about coffee. So yesterday, I'm gonna back this up a little bit, and I'll open with a little bit of racism in the chitter, because there was apparently a triple homicide right in my backyard in the wee hours of yesterday morning. I didn't even hear about it until after the show, and with some degree of I'll admit shame, my first reaction was, there was a gunfight in my backyard and I missed it? Well, poop. But in all seriousness, it's probably a tragic event. 2 adults and 1 teenager is the way that it's being billed. Were killed by a fourth individual. The identity of the fourth individual has not been released. The identities of the 2 adults and 1 teenager have not been released. Because of the way it's phrased, 2 adults and 1 teenager, that could easily be 2 21-year-olds and 1 17-year-old. Or it could be mommy and daddy and their kid. But you'd think if it was mommy and daddy and their kid, it'd say something more like that. But that was right in my backyard yesterday, and as a result, this is how connections happen and are kind of darkly funny. I haven't been listening to a lot of talk radio lately. Basically, since Rush died, talk radio's just gone to the toilet. Eric Erickson's all right, but a poor substitute. But I flipped over to some talk radio, and what I was really looking for was the news specifically on that incident. And I didn't hear, there wasn't anything. They weren't talking about it on the news yesterday morning. But it was mentioned that there's this article from this group AFRU, and we'll talk about this article a bit, that suggests, actually that's going to be basically the whole show, but the article makes the lofty claim that drinking coffee is racist. Now, we talked about Scott Adams and his statements. It's been almost 2 weeks now. And, about 2 weeks. Anyway, we talked about Scott Adams' cancellation because of his various statements. And since we're going to be talking about coffee and racism, I thought we would start. We'll do a little tribute to Scott Adams and the simultaneous sip. If you're not familiar with the simultaneous sip, I'm mentioning it now to prepare you. We're all going to take a drink of coffee together. And we're going to do it with Scott Adams-ish. So here's Scott, and he has something to say.
All you need is a cup or a mug or a glass, a tankard, chalice, or stein, a canteen, jug or flask, a vessel of any kind. Fill it with your favorite liquid. I like coffee. And join me now for the unparalleled pleasure of the dopamine hit of the day. The thing that makes everything better. It's called the simultaneous sip. It happens now. Go. Yes, I believe
Perfect.
Locals is working, and you...
Perfect. And so, Scott Adams has been canceled. And he's been canceled for making some statements which have been taken ungenerously out of context. The result, however, has been a lot of people sharing arguments for his statements. While I was researching this morning, part of what I looked at was the Twitter, and I'm not going to be sharing some of these videos that I'm currently referencing because they are so infuriating, and I'm hoping that we can have a little light fun and maybe a little informative conversation on this topic, rather than you just listening to me rant about the inherent violence of certain activities and situations. But one of them that really just absolutely ground my ass was this little girl who could not have been more than 3 or 4. She's about the age of my youngest daughter. A little blonde girl with some candy on a tricycle, and 3 other children came over and grabbed her by her wrists and started punching her in the face with their own hands, took her candy, and they didn't take her candy to steal her candy. They took it from her and threw it onto the ground and stomped it into the dirt, shoved her off her tricycle, and beat her. And the most horrifying thing about all of this is the angle at which the video was shot. Because the video was shot at a downward angle of about 30 degrees. Which means that as these little monsters were abusing this poor child, someone who was tall enough, as in at least several years older, with a cell phone, was filming the event instead of interceding and doing what's right. This person is worse morally than the men and women who watched a rape occur on a New York subway several weeks ago without interfering. Yes, I am making the argument that watching the victimization of a child by a violent mob is worse than watching someone be raped without interceding. Because ostensibly, the adult on the subway had some recourse of self-defense. The little 3 or 4-year-old girl, you cannot name a more vulnerable individual, as evidenced by the video itself, right? And I'm going to try to make that the last really serious tone that I take this morning as we dive into this a little bit. So here's the article. The article asks the question, is coffee racist? Hold on. Oh, there are so many places I can go with this conversation. Let's see how many tracks I jump today. Created by black people for black people, and now a pillar of white supremacist capitalism. If you consume coffee, you are helping an industry built on racism. Shut the hell up. Okay, and clarify something for you guys. Slavery was a thing. It happened. Now let's talk for just a second about how it happened and how slavery is like coffee. Black people enslaved other black people and then sold them to white people. Coffee, the origins of coffee are Ethiopian. Now, Ethiopian coffee is pretty far down. It's barely still in the top 10 of coffee producers in the world. Brazil tops that list, followed by, I believe, Vietnam. Coffee is grown and produced and sold all over the world by all flavor of not black people. The vast majority of coffee you consume is produced by Asians, whites, and Hispanics. And yes, produced, as in grown, harvested, roasted, ground, and brewed. And yes, there are white people growing and roasting the coffee. So their argument essentially boils down to white people got coffee and therefore it is racist. Let me clarify something. White people got coffee, and that's the only reason the rest of the world ever heard of it. Because the Ethiopians that were producing the coffee at the time didn't travel. They didn't trade. They didn't go places to trade. The only commerce they were exposed to was when white people came and traded with them, or when Arabs came and traded with them, or when Jews came and traded with them. Coffee made it out into the wider world because merchants traded for it. So, you'll hear often people complain about, oh, well, I'm not going to own Nike or whatever, because they produce their commodities, they produce their saleable items, their widgets, in sweatshops overseas. It's modern slave labor. No, it's not. In fact, modern slavery is, it's just slavery. As in currently on the continent of Africa, there are at least 10 million current slaves. Roughly 7,000 people in Africa are slaves right now, currently, today. The open-air slave trading markets reopened while Obama was president because of his policies. It was a direct result of Obama's foreign policy. But even before the open-air markets were reopened, slavery never stopped. The only places slavery stopped was where the evil racist white people were in charge and said, we're putting a stop to this. Prior to white contact with the so-called dark continent, slavery was a thing that was done by blacks and Muslims. Right? And some enterprising white guys said, hey, wait a minute, you buy people? And did. There are more slaves currently in Africa today than crossed in the entire period of the Atlantic slave trade. When slavery was a thing in Europe and in the United States, it was less than 3% of the population that owned slaves. During that time, those slaves were not only black. There were black slaves, white slaves. They were from all over the place, right? There were indentured servants. There were just straight up slaves born into slavery of every color and flavor. The first slave owner in the United States was a black man with black and white slaves, right? It's a joke. The conversation around it currently is a joke. It's a very carefully curated lie about the actual conduct of the past. And then the next piece of it, look at the places where slaves were purchased out of Africa and taken across the world. And you will find in every case, without exception, the now far removed descendants of the original slaves have a dramatically better life, dramatically better quality of life than the people who originally enslaved their ancestors back home. Without exception. So, the idea that coffee is racist merely because white people like it, shut up. Just shut up. When you look at the whole industry of sweatshops, and you look at something like this where you've got people arguing that coffee is racist, there are Ethiopian coffee farmers today who make a living. Some of them are very wealthy. And that is only because Chinese people and Korean people and white people, yes, Germans, Italians, French, et cetera, because people all over the world purchase coffee. Same with sweatshops. Oh, it's just evil that you pay these people $1 a day. No, it's not. Because the alternative that exists is nothing. $365 a year doesn't sound like a lot of money to you because you might make that in a week or a day. But when it's enough to buy any food at all, that's a big deal. Because the alternative is slow, rotting starvation. Right? That we have a high quality of life in the United States does not mean that a less high quality of life in another country is not a preferable alternative to the available options. Would it be nice to pay them more? No, it would not. It would be desirable for them to earn more if it were an option. But what is paid to the sweatshop workers is the wage that is low enough to justify the export of the labor. It costs more in the United States to produce goods, not because the law says it should. In part because we refuse to work for such low wages, but in reality because the cost of living is so high that it doesn't make sense to work for those low wages. If the wages are sufficient for you to live on, and there is not an alternative, you'll take the job. Right? And many Americans are about to learn a very hard lesson that you're going to take the job that you can get because there's not an alternative. Right? With the bank failures that we're seeing and the massive inflation, right? You know, even if a Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis wins in 2024 and sets everything back on the right path, and we start to see deflation like we did in Trump's third year, it's going to take a hot minute for the ship to get back in ship shape. it's not going to happen overnight. So let's go back a little bit and talk about the basic history of coffee, right? And this idea that it's just pure racism. Okay, before 1000 AD, members of the Gala used berries from coffee tree, ground up and mixed with animal fat to give them energy during the day. And that, maybe that's the company I should open right there. Hey, what do you sell? Oh, I sell bacon coffee. Or coffee bacon, whatever. We call it boffy. We call it cakin. It's a strip of meat encrusted with coffee, and you eat it. I might have to experiment with this. So what do you say, Sergeant Major? Let's go get us a pork belly and salt it and rub coffee grounds all over it and smoke it and see what happens. Might be the next cronut, right? So Arab traders bring coffee with them and domesticate the coffee plant. They also use them to boil a drink they call kawa, which, by the way, they still drink in Afghanistan, and it's all right. It's not Cuban coffee, right? And it's certainly not the Arabica. It's made from Arabica beans, but it's a different creature. It's thicker. It's kind of it's okay. I'll stop there. It's okay. 1453, Ottoman Turks bring coffee to Constantinople, and I want you guys to see a trend here, right? We're into basically the 1600s, right? We're into the 1600s talking about coffee that began before 1000 AD, right? The history of coffee stretches back to before 1000 AD, and until basically 1600, it was something that was primarily enjoyed by Arabs, right? Arabs are only black when it's politically convenient. That's part of this conversation. Arabs are only black when it's politically useful for them to be so. And I don't mean that so much as a criticism of Arabs. I mean that more as a criticism of capital B blacks, as in the political identity of blackness, quite distinctly from black people generally. And that is a very important distinction in the context of this kind of a conversation. So 7 years after the Venetians got their hands on some coffee, Captain John Smith, one of the founders of the colony of Virginia at Jamestown, introduces coffee to North America, right? Almost half a century later, Italy gets its first coffee house. England gets its first coffee house 7 years after that. And, coffee. After the Boston Tea Party, drinking coffee becomes a patriotic duty in America. Absolutely. Hail old glory. Praise the Lord and pass the ammunition. Hills Brothers is born in 1900 along with Earl Harbinger, which is a joke for a very small select few of you that I hope you enjoyed and take advantage of. And then basically the timeline ends in 1971 when Starbucks opens its first store in Seattle's Pike Place public market, which by all accounts may be the death of coffee. That said, I am a ravenous coffee drinker from way back. When I say that I drink a lot of coffee, let me clarify. I brewed my first pot this morning at about 3 o'clock. I have been in more than one gunfight, and they all had two things in common: Arabs and a cup of coffee. Which is to say that I was drinking coffee at the time of the gunfight. I had my Tervis tumbler with the big Army logo on the front of it that my baby brother sent me while I was deployed in Afghanistan, and before that I had my re-up cup, which was a 10 mug with a handle on the side of it before, well, frankly, the handle got shot off in a gunfight. It was very disappointing. But I would go out on patrol in Afghanistan, and I would have a cup of coffee in my hand while I was doing patrols in an active gun zone, an active war zone. That was we didn't play about the coffee, right? And I took my coffee very seriously. I still take my coffee seriously. I took my coffee very seriously even when I was deployed. Not quite to the level. I'm going to tell y'all a couple war stories now, and then I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. So first, and I wish Macarena was watching this morning, or at least one of my old war buddies, because they'd get a chuckle out of these. So while I was deployed, the Army's bad about getting bad coffee, and it's not bad coffee. It's mediocre. It's serviceable. And sometimes you run out of coffee filters, and toilet paper is the correct answer because it's the only alternative. Just like a buck in the sweatshop, sometimes toilet paper is the coffee filter. It's the one that's available. And that's how it works out. But while I was there, I had people who love me. I have a wonderful mother and a wonderful wife, and they would send me alternately cans of chock-full of nuts, which is my favorite cheap coffee, and bags or cans of Kona. And it was usually my wife that would send me the Kona because she was actually in Hawaii at the time. Tim, thanks for that, brother. Tim at Starbucks once developed a lisp. Was it a Spanish Starbucks? So mom and my wife and dad would send me coffee while I was deployed, and I had my own separate coffee pot that I bought off a local, and I would make Kona and chock-full of nuts in my chew. And even though there was one of the big church urns in the TOC, the Tactical Operations Center, the first sergeant, the commander, the lieutenant, the XO, the platoon sergeants, the PLs, they would come and knock on my chew and come looking for coffee, come asking for coffee. And I always got a chuckle out of that. Everybody knew, even some of the local Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police sergeants and team leaders would come and ask me for coffee. And every now and then I'd actually trade. They sent me plenty of coffee. Every now and then I would trade coffee for commodities like cigarettes, or one time I traded 2 pounds of Kona to a mechanic on Fob Wasab, on Fob Wilson. I traded 2 pounds of Kona to a mechanic on Fob Wilson to fix the AC in my up-armored MATV. Because, buddy, I wasn't about to do no Afghan summer without AC. That wasn't happening. So, to be clear, they'd have fixed my AC. But for 2 pounds of coffee, I got it fixed today. Now, the other one, I had another battle buddy that was downrange at the same time, but on a separate mission. And he brought with him, or he ordered online and had delivered. I'm not sure on that, but he actually had a coffee roasting oven at his home base. His job didn't have him out in sector very much. He basically stayed on one of the larger camps, one of the larger fobs. But he actually set up a roastery while he was there, and that was his thing. He would get up extra early in the morning and roast coffee, or he'd put it on the night before and roast it so it was fresh to grind in the morning, right? And he'd get up early enough to keep fresh coffee roasted, and that made him very popular in an office full of admin and nerds and high-ranking officers, because he would order expensive, and he still does this. He would order expensive coffee and roast it and produce it like that. Now's the part that's fun. This is my fault. So when he first arrived in Hawaii, he was sent to me because I was the training and operations NCO at the time. And he and I knew each other from previous training, previous TRADOC postings. We had been at a school together. We had been at an A school together. And we weren't actually close previously. Like, we had chit-chatted and hung out a bit, but I don't think we were very close before we got to Hawaii. We become much closer friends after we got to Hawaii. But they bring him in and introduce him to me. And this guy, it's Macareno. Several of you watching have met Macareno. You know him. He was a great guy. Very religious guy, and I think he's on route to be I almost said clergy, clergy, but on route to be a chaplain now. But he was also a competitive bodybuilder, a very successfully competitive bodybuilder. Did the CrossFit thing, right? He's almost as tall as I am, and ripped and cut, looking sharp. And they bring him to me because it's his first real duty station. And to be fair, it was also my first real duty station, but I'd been there for about 6 months, and I was the training and operations non-commissioned officer in charge at the time. So they brought him to me to get him oriented, get him set up, and help him get moved in and all that good stuff, paperwork, et cetera, et cetera. And the first thing I said when they brought him to my desk was, okay, well, you need the tour, so let's start with, we'll go up to the PX. It's just up the hill here, and we'll get a cup of coffee. And then we'll just go for a walk around base, and I'll show you around a little bit. And he says to me, "Oh, I don't drink coffee." And I said, "You understand? We're in Hawaii, right? We're in Hawaii where they grow the Kona. Like, it. Okay. So for you guys in the audience who don't know this, let me clue you into something fun. If you go to Hawaii, they have Kona on tap in the gas stations. Now, it's like a 10 or 20% blend, but it's still Kona, and it's still delicious. But Macareno tells me I don't drink coffee. And I'm like, wow, you're breaking my heart, man. Let me help you. I'll introduce you to good coffee. And he says, no, because, I got to worry about my diet and all that with my bodybuilding and whatnot. So, it's all the fat from the cream and all the sugar. It's not good for you. Huh? I said, oh, I see. You've never had coffee. No, I've had coffee. It's just, it's too sweet. No. Coffee should be bitter. Not grainy, not sandy. No. Bitter is not a negative quality. It is a flavor. So let's go get a cup of coffee. You drink it black because it's delicious, and you'll understand. And so we went and got a cup of coffee, and then I said, okay, now I'm going to show you something a little fun. That's a little, and I got him a Borgia, which is black coffee over a block of unsweetened baker's chocolate with orange zest over top of it. It's bitter and acrid and aggressive and thick and sticky, and there's no sugar, and it's amazing. And now the guy is an obsessive hobbyist roaster. That I think he actually sells some roasts here and there. I'll have to get in touch with him and see about selling some of his coffee on the show. Speaking of buying coffee, before I wrap this up and call it a day, there is a link in the description. I haven't bothered y'all about it recently. And I see we've got quite a few viewers on the Rumble. Thanks for joining us this morning, guys. Good to see y'all over there. So the link in the description is for the Buy Me a Coffee for the Brushfire Mind. And that is, so the Buy Me a Coffee link, that's not money I put in my pocket, right? It's not, I'm not just going out and grabbing a Starbucks or something. I don't go into Starbucks because of their stance on the Second Amendment, which they could piss up a rope over. The Buy Me a Coffee link, the money that goes there, we're actually using that money for the show, for the BFM, for things like equipment upgrades and to help defray the cost of things like it's running the show is not free, Right, we're on every platform out there. I use a service called Restream to do that. That costs about $300 a year. Stuff like that. So please, if you can spare a $5 or $3, hit that buymeacoffee.com button and leave us a tip there, and we would greatly appreciate it. And I think that's all I've got for you this morning. I need to go ahead and put a pin in it. The last thing I want to say, because I've got so many people watching on Rumble right now, I'm glad to see you guys on Rumble, but I don't see any comments in the chat on Rumble. Everybody's commenting on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitch. And don't get it twisted, guys. I love you too, and I appreciate the hell out of y'all. So, but I want y'all to know this, and this is something that my buddy Alex McDonald is working on, and believe it or not, Steven Crowder is working on too. Rumble, we're hoping they get their stuff together. Rumble's a great platform, but they don't play well with Restream and the other multiple streaming outlet systems. So, like right now, I have to have two windows open, one so that I can see the chat for Rumble, which is unfortunately empty. Which is not to say I don't appreciate the hell out of you guys watching and that those likes that you're throwing over there. But the chat, I have a consolidated chat window that shows me everything from YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, etc. It does not get the Rumble chat. So if you're on Rumble and you want to drop something in the chat, then I'm looking at it over there. If you're on any of the other platforms and you haven't already followed us on Rumble, please help us grow on Rumble, because as you guys have noticed, as many of you who are regular viewers have noticed, we have a bad habit of getting thrown off of YouTube from time to time. Now, we almost always, and by we I mean I, because this is my department, I almost always file and successfully win my appeal when we get thrown off for saying something that offends the delicate sensibilities of our censorious overminds. Yes, I'm talking to you, YouTube. You shitburgers. But we do get popped off for a couple of days at a time here and there. We very rarely serve the full term because, again, I very effectively file the appeals, and when you start talking about lawyers, people get nervous and they say, yeah, whatever. Say what you want. Right. COVID was a lab leak. The vaccine doesn't work. What did I tell you? So, but go follow us on Rumble as well, so that when we do get yeeted off the YouTubes or the Facebooks or the other government shills, you can find us on Rumble, because we're live every morning, every weekday morning at 7:30, whether the government likes it or not. So, Cameron will be back with us tomorrow, and we will be watching the news very carefully today to see if there are any more developments in the Donald Trump arrest and indictment threats. I am deeply amused by the suggestion. I am especially elated at what this means for his 2024 prospects. If they arrest Donald Trump today, if they clap him in irons today, that's it. That's the election done. He wins. Hands down. Now, I'm relatively sure he's got this in the bag, as long as he doesn't die of old age before next November. But if they clap him in irons today, that's it. The only way they win 2024 is if they get even more non-existent voters to come out for the other side. So, y'all be safe out there. We love you. Tomorrow's Woke Wednesday, and we will see you in the morning.